Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel Tomcat Stitchery. I'm Whitney and I am here with the Cashmerette Hartwell vest Sew Along. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the pattern, the supplies you're going to want to need, and then we're going to dive right in. So the Hartwell vest is a tailored vest that can be worn over or, over or worn alone as a wonderful top or layering piece. It is a tailored vest that features welt pockets in the front. These can be made either as faux welt pockets or non-functioning or as an actual functioning welt pocket. We'll be showing both methods in this video. It features a little the belt in the back that is great for if you want to cinch in a little bit at your waist or let it out. We're going to be going over how to make that and how to make it so you can cinch in that back part of the waist as well. The pattern features princess seams. It is fully lined and just a really great piece to add to your wardrobe. The pattern is classified as intermediate, and I would say this is most likely because of those welt pockets, but I'm going to hold your hand through those. They really aren't hard. So if you are a beginner seamstress, maybe someone that is a little bit more looking to expand a little bit more adventurous, don't be scared. We will go right through it, and it's actually not that hard once we get into it. As far as fabrics, you're going to want something with a little bit of structure. For this sew along, I am using a cotton twill, which is a fantastic fabric to use, but you could use a brocade, linen, denim if you want to. Any bottom weight, I would say, fabric would be fantastic. Even a linen rayon blend would be really lovely. Interfacing, I am using a medium weight interfacing. I am using an interfacing from Palmer Pletch, which is the Perfect Fuse medium. In addition, you are going to need some lining. Now, depending on how you're going to wear this might determine what lining you use. You want something with a little bit of drape. For this sew along, I'm actually using a rayon challis for the lining, the body of this. But if you are going to be wearing this over other garments, you may want something that's a little bit slicker, such as a Bimberg rayon, an acetate lining, a silk, if you want to go really fancy, a silk charmeuse, a silk crepe, those would be really beautiful. The amount of lining that is actually needed for this project is pretty minimal, so it's a great scrap buster. So if you've got some beautiful silk or something that you've got scraps left over from another project, you're not sure what to use them for, this would be a really fun one for that as well. In addition, you're going to need 4 buttons, as well as a vest buckle for the back, a 3/4 inch vest buckle there for the back. Other than that, some great sewing machine needles. I enjoy the Schmetz Microtex. I am using a size 14 for this project, as well as thread. I am going to be using a contrasting thread for this class in order for you to be able to easily see what I'm doing. You're obviously going to want to choose something that matches your fabric a little better, or not. It's completely up to you. The pattern does come in their full size range from a 0 to a size 32, and in cup sizes from cup size C all the way up through a cup size H. For this, I'm actually making a size 10 with a GH cup, and I do grade out a little bit at the waist for my own personal body shape. All right, how do you get this pattern? This is this is actually April's, Cashmerette's April Club pattern. However, there's a few different ways that you can get this pattern. If you sign up for the lowest tier of the club, you can grab that pattern now if you grab that in the month of April. Otherwise, you are going to need one of the higher tiers. You're going to need that all access tier in order to get all the club patterns. It's actually a really fantastic deal. I have it, pay for it with my own money, all access, to get access to not only all of the patterns, but also the lives and the forums and the classes that they offer through that all access is really, really invaluable. So that is how you're going to get your hands on this newest pattern. All right, so let's go to the cutting table and take a look at our pattern pieces, what we need cut out, how many we need cut out of each pattern piece, what needs to be interfaced and all of that, and then we're going to get started sewing. All right, so we're now going to go through our pieces, and I'm going to show you what you need to have cut out of what fabrics, where interfacing needs to go, and highlight a few notches and marks that you definitely want to have marked before we get started sewing. So we already went through appropriate fabrics in that, but as a reminder, I am using a cotton twill, a bottom weight cotton twill for my main fabric. I am using the Palmer Pletch Perfect Fuse Medium for my interfacing. And then I'm actually using a rayon challis for my lining. I'm making this as a sample. If I were going to be wearing this over things, I would use a fabric that has a little bit more shine to it, so a little slicker, so that it would go easily over button-up shirts, that sort of thing. So that's when I would choose like maybe a silk, like crepe de chine or a silk charmeuse, or even a rayon Bemberg, or any kind of slippery acetate, any kind of slippery lining fabric like that. But for this, I am using a rayon challis. All right, let's go through all of our pieces. And for it being a vest, there's quite a few. So the first one is piece number 1, which is our, sorry, this is a taped together pattern, but this is our center front. I have used 1C here, and this A, B, and C depends on what cup size you're using. I am using the GH cup, so I have done a 1C. You'll also notice that my pattern isn't cut directly close to the line for the waist. I need just a little extra room. I cut a size 10 for my measurements, but I need just a little bit of extra room at the waist, so I have cut at my princess seams, given myself a little bit of extra room there at the waist, because I just need that for my body. So if you're seeing that, that is what that little extra is. All right, in addition to piece 1, we want to make sure you clip into all of your notches. And then I have gone ahead and marked my Welt Pocket placement here with a friction pen, and I did that by just popping a pen into the 4 corners of my piece, and then marking those 4 corners, and then just connecting them with a ruler. So I have gone ahead and marked those welt lines, but these will actually disappear, because once we have sewn our side front and our center front together, then our interfacing goes on. So I'll show you those tricks when we get to that point, but you're also going to need interfacing 3, which is the pocket interfacing, and you're going to cut 2 of that. And this is the only piece of interfacing that is not applied at this point. We do this after we have sewn 2 pieces together, so that we will need to make sure that this stays with us. But yeah, interfacing 3, which is the pocket interfacing, you need to cut 2, and I have, and those will get fused a little bit later in the sewing process. All right. And we need 2 of those center fronts. Next, we've got piece 2. Again, I've got 2C because I am making the GH cup. Make sure you've got your notches. Again, just like with the front, I marked my welt. See, the welt goes across that seam, so we'll sew that together and then put our interfacing in. So I marked my welt the same way I marked it on center front. But we need 2 of those, and there's a ton of notches, and you're going to want to mark all of those, because that's going to make sewing this so much easier. Next, piece 3 is our pocket welt. We need 2 of these in our main fabric and 2 in interfacing. And I've gone ahead and fused my interfacing to the back of these, and I've gone ahead and done that welt marking on the back with a friction pen. So the friction pens do go away with heat, but again, if you want to use a water soluble, chalk, whatever your favorite method of marking is just fine. But I've gone ahead and marked those, and you'll have 2 of those. Next is piece 4. This is the pocket facing, and you just need 2 of these. No interfacing needed for this piece, but I have got maybe 2 of these, 2 of those cut. Piece 5 is optional. If you want to do a functioning pocket, you are going to need piece 5. This is the pocket bag, and you're going to cut 2 out of lining fabric. Now, when I am doing a welt pocket, I all the time prefer my pocket bag to be made out of a sturdy cotton. Most of the time, this is not what I'm choosing for my actual lining, because I want the lining to be slippery. I just find it so much easier to sew, and if it's a usable pocket, just so much easier to use. So if you are doing the pocket as a functioning pocket, you are going to need 2 pocket bags. And I've actually cut 2 pocket bags out of a cotton lawn that I have that's skin toned-ish. I mean, not really my skin tone, but it is skin toned-ish. So it won't show through with my, medium colored fabric. I will be doing for this sew along, I will be doing one of the welt pockets as a faux welt pocket and the other one as a functioning welt pocket, so that I will be showing you both ways that you can do this. So whichever way you choose is fine, but if you do want to have them functioning, you are going to need 2 of the pocket bags, and it does say optional on here. That's piece 5. Piece 6 is our right back belt, and piece 7 is our left back belt. So we're going to need just one of each of those. Piece 8 is our center back piece, which is right here, cut on the fold. You need one of these cut on the fold, maybe. And again, make sure you have all those notches marked. These are going to become very important as we get ready, as we do our sewing. Piece 9 is our side back, which is right here. We need 2 of these cut out of our main fabric. Piece 10, I've got 10C here because again, I'm doing the GH cup. This is the middle front lining, and you need 2 of these cut out of lining. So I have got 2 of those cut out of lining with all of my notches marked. And again, it just depends on what cup size you're making as to whether or not you need 10 A, B, or C. Same with piece 11. I have got 11C here, which is my side front lining, and we just need 2 of these cut out of the lining. Mark all those notches. Oop. Piece 12 is our hem, front hem facing, and we need 2 of these cut out of fabric and 2 cut out of interfacing. And I've gone ahead and interfaced the wrong side of both of those pieces, so they're all nice and ready to go. Next is piece 13, which is our front facing. This is kind of a crazy pattern piece here. This goes along with our interfacing, let's see, what does this say? Interfacing 1C because I did the GH cup, okay? So my front facing is 13C because again, I did the GH cup, and then interfacing 1 is your front interfacing, and I've got interfacing 1C because I need to match my cup size for that as well. And I've gone ahead and interfaced, put it on the front. So this is what the interfacing looks like on that front facing piece on both sides. So those 2 pieces go together. "14 is our center back lining, and we need 2 of these cut out of interfacing. And again, I've cut into those notches so I know where those all fall. Piece 15 is our side back lining, and we need 2 of these cut out of lining fabric. So there are those 2 pieces. 16 is our back hem facing, and we need 1 of these cut on the fold, and then also the same with interfacing. So 1 main fabric cut on the fold and 1 interfacing cut on the fold. So that piece is completely interfaced. That is 16. Mark those notches. There's a notch hidden here under this overlap, but I have marked that. So make sure if you are taping your pattern piece together, you don't miss any notches. I've done that before, and very frustrating when you go to sew. And then our last piece is our back facing. We cut 1 of these on the fold with the main fabric, and this goes with interfacing 2 piece, which is our back neck interfacing. So I cut this out of interfacing and went ahead and fused it to the back neckline of my back facing. So that is all prepped and ready to go. So all my interfacing is fused with the exception of that interfacing 3, which is that pocket bag interfacing that will get fused after we've sewn those front panels together, when we get ready to do our pocket. So that is piece 17, and that is all the pieces that we need, pattern pieces that we need. In addition, you are going to want a good microtex needle. That is my favorite. For this heavier weight stuff, often like a 12 to 14 is probably the size of needle that you're going to want to use. I'll be using a 14 for my cotton twill. You're also going to want a hand sewing needle, some thread. You are going to want 4 5/8 of an inch buttons. I'm doing black because I'm going to be doing all my top stitching in black so you guys can see. So I picked black buttons, but 4 of these 5/8 of an inch buttons. And then you are going to need 1 3/4 inch vest buckle. So these are just like a little bitty buckle, as you can see, but they've got little teeth on the back that help cinch in that back waist and without needing holes. So I got that little belt buckle that goes on the back. Other than that, you may want to have a tailor's ham or a towel that's been rolled up. That's just going to help press those princess seams so much easier. And that's it. We are all ready to start sewing. Again, any questions on this part, leave them down below. I'll answer those as soon as possible. All right, let's go to the sewing machine and start sewing. All right, it is time to get sewing. So for this first step, we're going to be doing some stay stitching. So we need piece 1, A, B, or C. I've got 1 C here. And we need piece 8. So piece 1 is our center front piece, and piece 8 is our center back piece, because we're going to do some stay stitching. We are going to be sewing. Our seam allowances for this pattern are 1/2 inch. So at 3/8 of an inch, I'm going to sew, and I'm going to start at the shoulder seam, and I'm going to sew down to center front. Okay, at 3/8 of an inch. So on one side, I will be sewing with the right side up, and on the other side, I'll be sewing with the wrong side up. And then on piece 8, which was cut on the fold here, I am going to sew, again, stay stitching at 3/8 of an inch. I'm going to start at the shoulder seam and sew to center back, and then start at the other shoulder seam and sew to center back. This is so we're not pushing things off of grain, we're keeping things on grain. So we're sewing, pushing things to the center on both of those, okay? So at 3/8 of an inch, I'm gonna start at the shoulder seams and sew to center front or center back, and then I'll meet you back here for our next step. All right, so we've got our stay stitching in, again at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, because our seam allowances for this pattern are 1/2 of an inch. I've also gone ahead and marked the wrong side of my fabric with a couple of X's with a friction pen, so it'll go away with heat, only because I can easily see this is a twill, so I've got like a diagonal twill weave on one side, and then on the other side it looks flatter. I can see that, but I want to make sure that you guys can easily differentiate the right and wrong with my fabric as well. And then my back, the same thing. I started from one side, sewed to the center, and then flipped it over and started at this side and also sewed to the center to give myself a nice line of stay stitching there. Now I'm going to set this piece 8 aside. I'm going to fold it back up, and I'm going to put it away because we won't be dealing with that for just a little bit now. So we can set that one aside. With my piece 1, though, we are going to be sewing piece 2, A, B, or C, which is our side front piece to our center front pieces. If you've watched any of my Cashmerette or any of my sew-alongs period, I'm just going to show you on one side of the garment because the same thing is done on both sides, but you are going to have 2 of these. And the wrong side is marked with my Welt Pocket on this one, actually on both pieces here. Okay, so what we are going to do is I'm going to move these for a second. We are going to take one of our center fronts, and I'll just pick this one. And then we need the corresponding side front to go with that. Right sides together, which will be this bottom one. And we are going to be matching, so this concave curve that is here on center front, we are matching that, move my iron here, matching that with our convex curve that is here on our side piece. So we are starting here at this point, and we're going to match up our seam. Obviously, the larger cup sizes you are working with, the more extreme this curve is. So I'm just going to match. There are a ton of notches on Cashmerette patterns, and that's what we're doing. We are matching our notches along this side. And on the front side, you are going to have extra in between your points. That's fine. The sewing line matches, but the seam allowance line, so your cutting line, does not. It's just the way a curve works. But I will show you how to get around that. I'm also, I extended my welt all the way to the cut edge, which the pattern doesn't do. So when you're looking at these, they look like they're off, but I'm kind of thinking once this seam is sewn, those lines are going to be a lot closer than what they look like they are, just because of the angle of where those were coming off. I'm not too worried about that though right now. And on your side, it's going to go past your bottom just a little bit. That's just the excess there of that seam allowance. All right, so this is what it's going to look like. It is not going to lay very flat. Oops, sorry. But what we're going to do next is we're going to sew, we're going to go to the sewing machine together and sew with the curvy side down. So that side front down at that 1/2 inch seam allowance. So let's go to the machine and do that. Okay, so I am sewing with a 2.5 millimeter stitch length, and I've got my Microtex needle in, I've got my regular presser foot on. My machine comes with a dual feed option, which means it's feeding in both layers equally, which normally I really like. I'm actually going to disengage that because I actually want my feed dogs to be feeding this bottom layer in at a quicker rate than my top layer, because remember, we've got that excess fabric that is on the curvy side. So for one side, you're going to be sewing from the bottom up, and from the other side, you're going to sew from the top down. You just want to make sure that the side front is against those feed dogs, and that is the curvier side. Okay? Just a little trick. It's going to make life so much easier. And again, we are sewing right at that 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now my machine does do a locking stitch at the beginning and end of my stitch automatically. So, but you are going to want to back stitch if yours does not. I'm also using black thread so that you can see what I'm doing. You're probably going to want to pick matching thread. And as I'm going in between, I only pinned my notches, but as I'm going in between notches, I'm just making sure that that bottom layer is pulled flush with the top layer, and just go little by little. It's going to get really obvious that you've got excess fabric as we get into this curve right about now. So I've got my hand in between these two layers. You can kind of see my finger right there. And I'm just going little by little. And as we're going, I'm just pulling back that underneath layer to where those raw edges match. Again, I'm doing the GH cup, so I've got the most severe curve. And when we get up to this, I don't want to sew a pinch in, so I'm just going to kind of maneuver that around. Okay, so now we're just going to check on the underside. Oops, I actually got a pinch up here. That's funny. That wasn't even on my radar. If you are looking at your line of stitching and you notice that you do have a pinch anywhere, you don't have to undo the whole seam. You literally just need to unpick And then I'm just going to re-sew that little section. And I'm just, you know, stitching right over that previous line. Making sure that that locking stitch or back stitch happens at the beginning and the end. There we go. Okay. And now we're good the rest of the seam. So now let's go back to the ironing board, and I'm going to use a tailor's ham, and we are going to press this seam allowance towards the side. All right. So here is one side of the front of our vest. This is the wrong side up, clearly. And now we are going to press this to the side. Now, I want to be very careful because my pocket, my welt is done with a pen that disappears with ink, with heat. So I'm going to be very careful when I hit this area. It will go away when we put our interfacing on, but I'll show you what I do for that here in just a second. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just press this seam allowance towards the side. So in this case, it's I'm pressing it up towards the right-hand side here. But that obviously relies on which side you're working on. So this is obviously wrong side up. So we're just going to press our seam allowance to the side, and I'm pressing over a tailor's ham. And I'm just being very careful here not to hit that welt pocket yet. All right, so the flat part here, not a big deal to press. When we get into this deep curve, especially if you're doing one of the, like the GH, I'm actually going to stand my ham up on its side so that I can really make sure that I'm pressing in. Now, I know people are going to ask, should I be cutting into this seam allowance? If you were pressing your seam allowances open, technically yes. I just feel like pressing seam allowances open really diminishes the integrity. I know that that is the couture way to do things. I prefer to leave seam allowances intact when possible. Now, necklines, stuff like that, there is absolutely times where we need to clip into that seam allowance. But when it comes to our princess seams, if I can get away with just pressing it to one side, which the instructions call for, that is preference. But if you just are really having a hard time getting it to lay flat, absolutely, you can clip in there a little bit. I also feel like you get a lot of show through on the right-hand side with seams like ones that are going over your bust when you've got those clipped seam allowances. Another option would be to grade your seam allowances, which means you're going to cut the seam allowance, so the seam allowance that's going to lay closest to the outside down to like 1/4 of an inch, and then the second seam allowance, keep it at like 3/8 of an inch, or even leave it at 1/2 of an inch. That will help reduce bulk and help things lie a little bit flatter too. Okay, I'm now flipping it over to the right side, and I'm going to give it a good press from the right side just to make sure that that seam is laying nice and flat. And I'm just being very careful around that welt because I don't want to lose my marks. It's just really hard to remark those with the pattern pieces because they were separate. Okay. And I'm feeling good about those being able to stay as is. All right. So you're going to do that on both sides. And now it's time to add our interfacing. So we do need our interfacing 3, which is our pocket interfacing. This is the only piece of interfacing we've yet to fuse. Set that aside. And we're going to be laying this over those markings. And what I'm going to do, so I can see through this interfacing, and it's pretty even all the way around. I'm going to take a regular ink pen and very carefully dot each of the 4 corners. Now, I'm very carefully doing this because this will not go away. Now, you can obviously use a another marker of your choice. You know, if you've got something, you just need to be really precise with these. And I'm only marking the 4 corners. And I'll show you why here in just a second. So this should not, you should not be able to see this from the right side. And now I'm just going to fuse, because this will make my marks go away. Except for those 4 that I marked right there and there. Okay, next we want to mark our pocket. I'm going to let it cool just a little bit because again, it's a heat sensitive pen and I don't want it to, I want it to, the lines to stay. But I'm going to go back with my friction pen and we're going to mark this welt in again. So let me just let this cool a second and I'll come right back and we're going to mark our pocket. Okay, once we have our interfacing applied, I've marked the 4 corners of my welt here. We're going to be putting our pockets in. Now, the instructions have an option for doing a functional welt pocket and a non-functional, like a faux welt pocket, basically. I'm going to show you how to do both. So I'm going to do a functioning welt pocket on one side of this vest and a non-functioning on the other, or a faux welt pocket on the other. So, but they are the same directions up until a certain point. I will differentiate depending on which one you want to do, at what point you want to jump ahead to the next. You know, if you want to skip the functional one and go right to the faux, that is all down in the description box down below, timestamps, so you can easily skip over the part you don't want to see. But we'll be doing both. And again, the instructions are the same up to a certain point on this for the pocket. All right, so what we need for this is our completed fronts with that have been interfaced, and we need our welt pocket, which is this piece 3, and we should have 2 of those cut with out of main fabric and interfaced. And I've already marked my little welt on the side. One thing I think is really smart to do is let's measure this real quick. This is 1/2 inch wide, I know that, and it is 5 1/8 long. Okay, 1/2 inch wide, 5 1/8 long. So we just want to make sure that that is, in, you know, 'cause sometimes with our pens make things a little thicker. We want to make sure, I mean, if it's a little bit longer, that's fine. We just want to make sure that they match. So that is 5 1/8, and that is 1/2 inch wide. Okay, we want to mark our welts on both sides of our pockets according to the instructions. So what I'm doing here is I'm poking a pen through, actually, I'm going to do this at the same time. All right. So once we've poked through our 4 corners, I'm just going to take this friction pen and I'm just going to mark right where those pins are coming out. Another way that you can do this is also hand basting. Then it shows up on the right and the wrong side. I just have the worst time with accidentally sewing over my hand basting and then it being impossible to pull out. So up to you. So now I'm just going to take my ruler and again, I want to make sure that that is 5 1/8, and I am just going to then 1/2 inch wide. And that should match up with your 4 corners. Just like so. Okay, so now we've got our welt that has our box on both sides. And now we want to mark the same thing on our front. I'll do the other side. I don't need to do that on camera because it's the same thing. Okay, so now I'm just going to be connecting my dots. And again, it is, we want to make sure it's that 5 1/8. That's what's, I mean, we want placement here on this front, but we really want to make sure that it is the same length as our pocket piece. Like so. Okay, so now we have our box drawn on the wrong side, and then just like we did for our little pocket, I'm just going to pop a pin to those 4 corners. All right. Okay, now you're going to do this on the other side as well, and then I'll come back and we're going to get things ready to sew. Okay, once you have everything marked, now it's time to pin our welt to the front of our jacket, or to the front of our vest, right sides together. So right side of your welt to the right side of your vest. I'm kind of eyeballing it, but I mean, we'll do this a little bit more precise just to make sure things are lined up nicely. But what I'm going to do is turn this, and I'm just going to take some pins, and I'm going to go through the line that I've marked here on the front, poke through, and make sure, I'll show you here in just a second, I'm making sure that I'm going through that same line on the back. So I'm a little off that line on the back. Now I'm on that line on the back. And I'm off a little bit. So I'm just going back and forth. I want to line up these boxes as much as possible. They don't have to be perfect. We're just going for as good as possible. Okay. So I'm going to pop these in, a couple on each leg of the long part of the box, just to make sure everything is laying as it should. All right, so I'm just making sure that my pins are going through the pink line on the back, just like they are going through the blue line on the front. What is most important here, again, you could hand base this if you want, if you find that easier, that's absolutely fine, is that I don't care what's happening up here on this pattern piece. I do want to make sure, though, that this bottom section where I'm working is as flat as possible. I don't want to get any weird puckers. So now I'm just going to go in with some pins, and I'm going to pin around this area, because we're going to have to pull these pins out as we're sewing. And I don't want anything to, you know, shift around and get weird. All right. So there we have it. My welt pocket, or pocket welt, is pinned now to the front of my vest. So now we're going to go over, you can do this the other side as well, and now we're going to go over to the machine and sew it. Okay, so I've come back over here to my machine. I have decreased my stitch length to a, I would say between a 1.5 and a 2. I'm actually at a 1.75, but I know some machines can't get quite that specific. So somewhere we want to do a shorter stitch length. And I'm starting on one of the long sides, and I'm literally just going to be following this line that I drew in. And we want to start with a locking stitch or a back stitch. We're just going to sew down to this first corner. And when I get to this corner, go slow so you don't accidentally go past it. I'm going to count my stitches as I'm going down this short edge. It just really helps to keep a very nice, crisp box with your welt. So I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 stitches. And I'm going to remember that because I want to do 9 stitches on the other end as well. Okay, and again, we did 9 on the other side, so we want to do 9 on this side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And now we'll come back to where we started. And backstitch. All right, now is the scary part. We are going to cut into this over at the ironing station. But first we can remove the rest of our pins here. And go ahead while you're sitting here and take your stitch length back up to your 2.5 so that you don't forget and sew impossibly tiny stitches that you can't hope to unpick. All right, we've got that sewn down. Let's go over to the ironing board and cut into our welt. All right, we're going to cut our welts. Now this can be scary because you're cutting into your fabric and it can't be undone once you've cut into it, but I actually find this my favorite part. I love doing welt pockets. So what I'm going to do is actually just fold this in half, somewhere near the half, so I can take my scissors and cut, and I'm cutting right in between those two stitching lines, just right into the front. Then you can stick your scissors in and continuing cutting up the front, stop about 1/2 inch away from that end box, and then you are gonna cut, let me get closer so you can see what I'm doing, at a diagonal, and you're gonna cut up to, but not through, that stitching line. And then you're making a Y, and then you're gonna do the same, cutting to, but not through, that stitching line. Then we're gonna flip it, cut back this way till about 1/2 inch, and then cut to, not through, cut to, but not through, like so. Okay, so once we have cut, we are going to take this welt and we're gonna stuff it through the hole so that it's coming through the backside. Now, if you are noticing that you are not getting a nice crisp turn at these corners, if you're getting a little pucker, you can go back and clip. You probably haven't clipped quite close enough into that corner. That can be scary because you don't want to clip through your line of stitching, but that is probably what has happened. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just really quickly going to kind of press this flat, kind of just like in general. We'll get it really precise here in just a second. I just want it behaving for me. All right, so now you should have a nice hole in the center of your vest. All right, so from the back, what we're going to do first is we're going to take this bottom part of the welt and we're going to push it up. And we're actually going to press that seam allowance there open. Get a really nice, crisp press. Now I am using a cotton twill, so it presses really well. If your fabric does not press well, if you're using a brocade or something that's got some poly in it, doesn't want to press well, basting is going to be your best friend here. All right, once we have pressed that open, nice and crisply there, we're going to take this bottom and we're going to fold it until it fills half of the welt. And then give that a good press. So we just folded it back on itself. And now we just really quickly want to turn it to the right side and see how that looks. Make sure, number one, that we've got a nice crisp seam there, but that also that our welt is filling about halfway. If it's not, so I feel like that's a little more than halfway. Just gonna tuck that in, try not to burn my fingers, and give it a good press again. Okay. And then we're going to do the same from the top. So now we're going to put the top one down and press that seam open. I love doing stuff like this. It's just so, I find it very relaxing, precise. I love a bit of tailoring. especially when you're working with a fabric that actually wants to press well. And now I'm going to fold this top down, and I want the fold to meet the fold of the bottom so that they are just like two lips kissing. And then again, we're going to flip it and make sure everything looks good from the right. And I'm pretty happy with how that is looking. All right, so you're going to do the same thing with the other side, and then I'll meet you right back here. All right, so the last step before we veer off into functional versus non-functional is that we are going to take, so this is obviously right side up, pull this front over, and we're actually going to stitch right along this area as close to this stitching line as possible to this triangle on this end. And then we're going to pull up the end on this side and sew it, sew that little triangle down and those folds in place as well. Okay, so let's go to the machine and do that. All right, so I again have right side up, pockets right side up. I've pulled that front, side front up, and I'm going to be sewing this little triangle down to those folds that I made. And I want to sew as close as possible to that previous stitch line without sewing, oops, like I just did, onto the fold of that. And I just have my regular stitch length going right now. But I have now sewn that together. And then we're going to go to the other side and do the same thing on the other side. Make sure that you're back stitching at the beginning and the end. All right, and there you go. You've got the beginnings of the welt. This is the same for functioning or faux or non-functioning welt pocket. So if you're doing the functioning welt pocket, just keep watching. If you want to do the non-functioning, you will need to skip ahead to that section. And again, that's all in the description box. So I will see you there. Okay, if we are doing the functional pocket, this is going to be the tutorial for how to do the functional welt pocket. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go over to the machine and we're actually going to stitch in the ditch, which means you want that needle to fall right in this crease of that stitch line on both the top and the bottom. So we will go do that here in just a second. But you are also going to need your pocket bag. You're going to need two cut from lining. Again, I like to use a cotton lawn for this instead of the slippery lining. I just easier to maneuver. You need two. I'm actually going to only be using one because I'm doing one functional pocket and one non-functional. And then you're going to need your pocket facing. You should have cut two of the main fabric of those, regardless of which pocket you're doing. Okay, so those are the pieces we're going to need. So let's first go to the sewing machine and let's stitch in the ditch on either side of our welt. Okay, so like I mentioned, we're going to be stitching right in the seam here. I am using a high contrasting thread. Put that needle right there. So you're probably going to be able to see it a little bit. But if you are using a matching thread, the idea is for you to not be able to see this line of stitching. I have a line here right on my foot that shows me where my needle is going to go. That is what I am watching, not my needle. Once your fabric hits your needle, it's too late. You cannot steer any longer. So I am following that line and kind of gently pulling that seam apart a little bit as I go. And then you don't have to go all the way to the corner, just close. I'm gonna back stitch. So, well, actually I did pretty good there. You can't see it very well, but I have stitched. It makes it darker because I am using black thread on a pale orange fabric. And then we're going to do the same on the other side. Again, just my normal stitch length. And I'm just kind of pulling that seam apart just a little. I don't want to unfold anything or anything like that. Go slow over that seam. All right. I don't have scissors right here at the table. Okay. So there we go. You can see mine, but it is right there in the seam of that. If I had matching thread, you would not be able to tell at all. Okay, so once we have done that, we are now going to go back to the ironing board and get our pocket bag, pocket facing all situated. All right, so we need our pocket facing and our pocket bag. Again, I'm just doing this on one, but you will do this on both sides, obviously, if you're making functional pockets. So I'm going to remove my pattern pieces. This is the right side of my pocket bag fabric. This is also the right side of my pocket facing. I'm going to turn my pocket facing wrong side up, and I'm going to press down at 1/2 of an inch towards the wrong side. You can definitely measure that just to make sure. Like so. Then I am putting the wrong side of my facing against the right side of my pocket bag, matching my raw edges up here at the top and my raw edges at the side. Okay, then I'm going to go over to the machine. And I'm going to sew it 1/4 of an inch around my raw edges and sewing this folded edge down. So I'm going to go do that real quick and I'll meet you right back here. Okay, so we've got our little pocket bag piece here that I've stitched around the raw edges together, and then we have the folded finished edge that goes down here into the body. I'm just going to give that a little press, make sure everything's lying nice and flat. And now we're going to attach this to the welt, the whole welt situation. All right, so as a reminder, hopefully you can tell here, this is the top of the welt, this is the bottom of the welt. I am taking this little piece, this is the right side of my pocket bag, and I'm putting it right sides together with the top edge of this welt, like so. And you don't have a ton of wiggle room up here with that little piece, but I'm just going to pin those together. Actually, I'd like to pin those perpendicular. All right, like so. And now I'm going to go to the machine, flip this over, and just sew through that at 1/2 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so keep the whole body out of the way. You can fold it down, and we're going to sew that together at 1/2 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so you can see I've sewn it 1/2 of an inch here, and then there's that 1/2 of an inch here. Nothing through the front side. You can't tell from the front that I've done anything. Okay, so that is the top, and now we can give that a press just to make it all lie nice and flat. Steam is your friend when you're tailoring. All right, now we're going to take the bottom edge of the bag and kind of lift things up, and we're going to match the bottom edge, right side, this is the right side, to the right side of the bottom part of the welt. Like so. And pop 2 pins in. And now I'm going to go to the machine and I'm going to actually flip this over and I'm going to sew it 1/2 inch on this seam. Okay, let me go do that and I'll meet you right back here. Okay, so remember, this is the top, so this pocket piece is going up right now. And we've sewn it to the bottom part of the welt like so. Okay, so now I'm just going to press it carefully. I just want to press this bottom part. Make sure that's staying flat. Now we're going to take this bag piece and push it all down towards the bottom of the garment so that everything is laying flat. You want to make sure that this seam allowance is going down and everything is nice and flat, and then you can give it a good press. And then all we have to do is pop in a couple pins. And we want to be careful, we still are not sewing through to the front. So now I can go to the sewing machine and turn this over, make sure that that front's staying out of the way, and we're going to sew 1/2 inch up this way and 1/2 inch up that way. We can go do that together. So this is our pocket laying in place here. So I'm just going to flip this over so that I can make sure that the front of my jacket or vest is staying out of the way. And we're just going to start at the fold here. Make sure all those seam allowances are laying. You're probably not going to be able to hit a 1/2 inch when you get up here by this, the triangle that you already sewed down. We're just really wanting to close it up, so do the best you can. And again, this is all going to be enclosed in lining, so we're not even going to be able to see what's happening. And then we're going to go to the other side of the pocket. And sew up that side. Okay, let's go take a final look overhead. All right, so now we can see that our pocket is nice and flat. Give it one last press. We've got those two lines of stitching to sew up each of the sides. And then from the front, no change. It looks just like it did before we put in the pocket bag, but we do have a functioning pocket. The instructions do say that it could get some pull here at this welt when being worn when it is a functional pocket. So that's just part of having a functional pocket there. So there we have our functional pocket. You can now skip the next section. The next section I'm going to show you how to make a faux welt or a non-functioning pocket. So you can skip that section and head to the next section, and I will see you there. Okay, if you are making the non-functioning pocket, so the faux welt pocket, you are going to need your fronts that you've put together, your center front, side front, with your welt already put in, and you are going to need piece 4, which is the pocket facing. You do not need the pocket bag. Okay, so what we are going to do is we're going to flip this over. Ooh, we've got a lot of threads here. All right, so this is the top of our vest, and this is the bottom of our vest. I'm going to be placing this welt right side. This is the right side of the welt, and I am putting it right sides together with the back of this, I guess this is the back, this is the right side of the facing. I'm putting it to the right side of the welt that is the back side of the vest, if that makes sense. And I'm just going, it's a very large pin, pop in a couple of pins, and I'm matching the raw edges together. Okay, just like so. I didn't go all the way through the front, because now we're going to flip this over and matching up those raw edges, I'm going to sew at a 1/2 inch seam allowance just through that welt piece that's on the back side of the front of the vest and the welt facing. So just going to sew that 1/2 inch, and then I'll come right back here. Okay, so now we have that facing sewn to the back of that welt. We can give everything a good little press, but it is only sewn through the welt piece and the facing piece. It's not sewn through the front. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing here at the bottom, but because this is the same piece that they use for the functioning pocket as well as the non-functioning pocket, it extends past this bottom. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to flip this right side up like so, and then I'm going to take this bottom and I'm going to push it out of the way so that we can see what we're dealing with here. So this is the piece of the welt that is, been turned to the inside of the vest. And this is my welt facing here, facing right side up. I'm just going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut these flush. So I'm trimming off some of that facing. And now I'm going to pop a couple of pins in here. So this is the bottom part. Okay. Now I'm going to sew at a 1/2 inch along that seam with this, with my bottom part of my vest pulled up out of the way. So let me go do that real quick and I'll meet you right back here. All right, so now I have got this piece sewn on either end of my welt. I can give it a little press from the back, as well as a press from the front. I'm going to have to press this whole front here as soon as I'm finished, just because it's gotten very wrinkly. Okay, now we're going to go over to the sewing machine, and I'll take you with me, and we're going to stitch in the ditch right along these two seam lines. Basically, that means I want my needle to fall right in those previous seam lines. Obviously, I'm using a black thread so you can see what I'm doing. If you were using a matching thread, it'll be completely invisible. It will not be invisible with the high contrast thread. But we're just going to go right along these two long edges. So let's go to the machine and do that. Okay. So we want to very carefully stitch in the ditch. So I am just going to lower, I'm not changing my stitch length, just same 2.5. And I'm putting my needle right in that previous seam right there. Going to lower it. I am going to back stitch. I'm not going right to the corner. That gets a little too hard. I'm starting a little bit in front of it because that's all you need. We're just kind of securing things in place. So I am going to start. And this line right here on the middle of my presser foot is where my needle is going to fall. That is what I am lining up with the crease of that seam. I am not looking at my needle at all. If you're watching your needle, once the fabric's there, it's too late. So follow something in front of the needle. So I'm not going to go all the way to the corner, just close. And then I'm going to back stitch. And you can see it's pretty well hidden, but it's still a black thread in a pale orange like crease, so it's not going to be completely invisible. And then I'm going to do the same on this other side. And I'm watching that spot on my presser foot. All right. And there we have it, a faux welt pocket. It's not functioning, but it gives the same nice tailored look there on the front of the vest. All right. We can now move on to our backs. So I'm going to set these aside. Make sure you do this on both sides, and then set them aside. Maybe give them a good press real quick and set them aside, and I'll meet you back to start on our backs. Okay, so now we're going to be working on our backs. The first thing we're going to be doing is the belt. So you need piece 6 and piece 7, which are the 7 is the left back belt, 6 is the right back belt. It's kind of hard to say. And what we're going to do is we're going to fold these. Hot dog style. So we're going to go fold our long edges together. And this is right side, this is the right side. So I'm folding them right sides together. And I'm just going to pop a couple pins in there. The same with both of them. You should only have one of each. All right. And we're going to sew up one short side and then down a long side, leaving the other short side open. Up one short side, down the long side at 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I'm going to go do that on both of these real quick, and then I'll meet you right back here. Okay, so here we go. I've got one short side, one long side, one short side, one long side. So we're just going to take our scissors here. We're going to clip our corners and trim our seam allowances in half on both of these. Then we're going to do some pressing before we turn it right side out. So I always have a hard time with these long edges, getting them nice and crisp, especially when we're using bulkier fabrics like this cotton. So I actually like to go in, and this is going to press creases in that we don't want. That's okay. They will press out, I promise. I'm just going to take one of these pieces and kind of press it down so I can press that seam allowance open. And I just want to press that long seam allowance open as far down as I can get. Like so. Again, it's okay. It's going to put weird creases in there. That's fine. Those will iron out. I'm going to do the same on this shorter one. Like so. Okay, now we're going to turn them right side out. The end is not as big of a deal because it's short. I like to take an unsharpened pencil to turn these, but it is completely up to you. Sometimes it helps just to kind of pull it apart and kind of shove it in there a little bit. The reason I like to use a unsharpened pencil is that it doesn't accidentally blow through the end of your finished strap or whatever you're trying to turn. Okay, once I have turned those right side out, I do want to poke out those corners a little nicer. So I take a double pointed needle, you can use a chopstick, and I'm just feeding it through just to get those in little corners a little bit crisper. But because we went through and pressed that sewn seam open, it just lies so much nicer and flatter along that edge. And we're just going to give it a really good press. Like so. Okay, so now our back belt pieces are set and ready to go. I'll meet you back here with our other back pieces. Okay, so now we're going to need piece 8, which is our center back that's cut on the fold. that we already have our, oh wait, no, sorry, that's on the, never mind, that we've already stay stitched. And then piece 9, which is our side back pieces, and then our 2 belts, piece 6 and 7, which are our left belt piece and our right belt piece. Let's set side back aside for just a second. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be sewing these belt pieces in between these 2 notches here on center back, okay? And you should have clipped into those. I'm going to move this. But I'm just going to open this up, and this is the right side up on this. Just going to give that a good press real quick. And here are my 2 notches up here, and then I've got 2 notches that are on this side too. All right, when this is being worn on your back, this is the right side. This is the right side, and this is the left side. So in between those 2 notches, I'm going to pin my shorter piece, and I want that seam to be going down in between those 2 notches. And I'm going to pin that in place. And then on the left side when worn, again, I want that belt piece to be, that seam to be pointing down. I'm going to put that on the left side. Okay, just like so. Okay, I'm just going to go to the machine and I'm going to base these in place at 1/4 inch seam allowance. So let me go do that and I'll meet you right back here. Okay, so we have those belt pieces that are basted into place at the side seams. I'm actually going to take a pin and I'm going to pin these down because I don't want them getting in the way when we're sewing these side back panels in place. I don't want them flopping around and getting caught in any stitch line. Okay, so now we want to grab that side back again, which is piece 9, right here. This is right side up on the center back. So I'm just going to take, again, I'll be showing you how to do one of these and then you can do the other one yourself. And we're going to sew our side backs to our center back. So I'm just going to, this is just like when we did the princess seam on the front, except this curve is not nearly as steep as the one if you've got a larger bust. Match up my notches. All right, so let's go over to the sewing machine and we're going to sew this seam. Okay, just like with the front, I'm going to sew with the side piece that has the deeper curve against the feed dogs. So I'm sewing with center back up, and we are sewing at 1/2 inch seam allowance. And I'm just going to be making sure that my notches match, but that also I am keeping that raw edge in between the notches lined up together. All right, we check both sides. Everything looks good. Okay, do this on the other side as well, and then I'll meet you at the pressing table to press our seams. Okay, once we have our side backs sewn to our center back with that belt sandwiched nicely in between that seam, we're going to press our seams, and we are going to press those towards the side back. So we'll start from the back, give that a good press. Also, unless you have fabric that is like fraying like crazy, you don't have to finish your seam allowances on this because it is completely lined. All of these raw seams are going to be covered. So that is why I am not finishing any of these seam allowances. However, if you are using, I don't know, a boucle or something that, and your fabric is literally disappearing as you stare at it, you can absolutely finish off your seam allowances with a serger or by stitching, close to your first set of stitching lines, or finishing off with a zigzag. many different ways to finish off those seam allowances if you're worried about your fabric fraying. Otherwise, you can just leave your seam naked. All right, once we've done the wrong side, we're gonna flip her over and give a good press from the right side. And I'm doing this all over a tailor's ham. But you can also do this over rolled up towel or newspaper. Okay, and there we have a fully constructed back. I will meet you back here to do the shoulders. All right, time to do our shoulder seams. So here is my back, right side up. This is the right side. And I am going to be taking one of my fronts and putting it right side down. And I am matching them at the shoulder seam here. All right, so I'm just going to go over to the sewing machine and sew this at 1/2 inch seam allowance, and do the same with the other front to the other back at the shoulder seam here. I'm going to sew these both at 1/2 inch, and then I will meet you back here for pressing. Okay, once we have sewn our shoulder seams, we are just going to stick a ham under here. Got some stray threads. And we're going to press these seams open. This is the first, first open seam allowance that we're pressing. Okay. Now we have got the shell of our vest here completed. Obviously your side seams should not be done up yet, so don't worry about that. But now we're going to set this aside and we are going to start to work on our lining facing combo. So set this aside and I will meet you back here for that. All right, so now it is time to put our lining together, our lining and our facings together. So for this first step, you're gonna need piece 10. This is 10C. Again, it depends on which cup size you're using. And piece 11. I'm doing the GH cup, so I'm using the C, but obviously depends on your cups. So piece 10 and 11 are what you're gonna need for this first step. And that is the middle front lining and the side front lining. So we are going to take just 1/2 here. Obviously you'll want to do the same on both sides. So I'm going to move those out of the way. So here we've got our side front, right side up, and this is the really curvy side. And we're going to be putting our middle front on top of that. And just like with everything else, we just want to make sure that we are matching our notches. And I am doing that wrong. That is the wrong piece. Okay, let me walk you through this because you may make the same mistake I'm going to make. On your middle front piece, this curved piece gets attached to the facing. This side is what gets attached to the side front, okay? So again, if you're matching your notches, that should all work out. So I'm going to take this piece, flip it like this. So it is a concave curve going on a convex curve. So we're going to line up our edges here, matching our notches. And just like we did with our princess seams in the front, we're going to sew with the the curvy side, so the side front against the feed dogs. All right, so I'm really only pinning the notches there. So there's quite a bit of excess in between those 2 points that'll need to get fed in, and we'll just go slow. So do that for both sides, and then I'll meet you over at the sewing machine, and we're gonna sew this seam. Okay, so I have changed my thread to lime green so that you can easily see on this fabric. So I want to sew, like I said, this here, oops, sorry, is my middle front. And this is the side front under here. So I want the side front against the feed dogs so that we are feeding, easing in that extra length, like we talked about, making the feed dogs do that work. So we're sewing at that 1/2 inch seam allowance. All right, so we're just going to make sure that everything looks good on both sides. No pinched parts of the seam allowance. I think we're good. You're going to do that for the other side as well, and then I'll meet you at the ironing board to press. Okay, and once we have that seam sewn, we're actually, instead of pressing this towards the side front like we did on the main shell of the jacket, we are pressing this seam towards that middle front piece, that smaller piece. And do this on both sides, and then we'll go from there. All right, so once we have our front little 2 pieces sewn together, it is time to attach piece 12, which is our front hem facing. So we've cut 2 of these out and 2 of interfacing, so I've got 2 here. And the first thing we're going to want to do is sew a little stay stitch line into this top little edge. We're going to be sewing just shy of 1/2 inch, like literally just inside 1/2 inch. I don't know, like an inch-ish on either side of that point or that dip in there, okay? And let me see, I'm going to be doing this on this side, get the right one. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to clip down to but not through that stitching line. Back up a little bit so you can see what I'm doing, because we want that seam to be able to spread just like so. So we're going to be sewing this edge to the bottom of our little front piece here, okay? And it's going to look like, oh, that doesn't go at all, but it will. So we're just going to place some pins in here, right sides together. And then when we get to this little corner here, we're actually going to turn the corner with, oh my gosh, stay in frame, Whitney. We're going to turn the corner like this. So this little edge here on that front piece, we're going to be lining this edge up with that. And I will back up and show you what we're working with. The point on the facing will extend past the lining part a little bit, because remember, we're matching sewing lines together, not necessarily cut edges. And sometimes when you've got weird angles like that, that can look a little weird. All right, so then we've got this weird corner here. So we're just going to kind of finger press this in place, pop our pin right there where we clipped to but not through. Okay, so it's going to look a little funny, and it's going to stand a little funny when we're doing this. I'm going to adjust this actually just a little bit. I feel like that needs to be scooted over. Alternatively, you could also mark your point here on the lining, right? Just it's at that 1/2 inch mark. Just want to make sure we're as close as possible. Sewing into corners can be tricky, but not impossible. All right. And then I'll pop a pin. That looks better. Right there at that point. Right where we clipped in. Okay. Case in point. Okay, so now I'll take you over to the machine. We're now going to sew this, pivoting at that corner to the facing to the front lining, and we're sewing that at 1/2 inch, and we're going to be sewing with the facing, with the interfaced piece up. So let's go over to the sewing machine and sew this down. Okay, so we're going to be sewing with the interfaced part up. So we are just going to start here at so you'll be starting from one side, like the side seam on one side, and you'll be starting from like the kind of center frontish on the other. But we are just sewing with our 1/2 inch seam allowance. And here at the bottom, it's just pretty smooth sailing until we get up to this funky corner. But because we have this little stay stitched area, I am going to have to watch my pin here. And I went just inside the 1/2 inch. So I am just going to go I'm going right to this point right here, which is where I clipped into very carefully. And I'm kind of pulling any folds out of the way. And then when I get to that point, which is right there, I'm going to pivot and kind of rearrange the bulk so that I don't get any pinches in there at that corner. And now we can continue on this way. So if you just go slow at those corners, if you have to unpick, it is not the end of the world. Or honestly, if you have a little pucker right there, it is not the end of the world. But we will check. Look at that. Oh, sorry. See? Perfect. Okay, let's go to the ironing board, and we're gonna, and also, you know, it looks a little puckery here. Trust me, once we hit it with an iron, it's gonna look perfect. So let's go to the ironing board, give this all a good press before we move on to our next step. Okay, so let's give these little front pieces a little press, and we are pressing that seam allowance. I mean, it's gonna naturally wanna go up towards the lining because that's gonna be the interfaced facing part is gonna be the stiffer of the seam allowances. So it presses pretty easily up into that lining. Okay, so once those are nice and prepped, we now want to grab piece 13, minus 13C, because again, I'm using the GH cup, which is our front facing. We should have 2 of these. And what we need to do is, just like on that little front facing piece, we need to do some stay stitching. So you've got 2 notches that are right here in the pattern. 2 notches. We're going to stay stitch in between those 2 notches there in that curve, just shy of 1/2 inch. And so just like we did with the front little facing pieces there in that corner, just shy of that 1/2 inch, which I've done here, as you can see. And then we're going to go through and we're going to cut 2, but not through that stitching line, about every 1/2 inch. We just want this to be able to spread because it is a very convex curve. sewing into a very concave curve. So just like this. I'm going to set this other one to the side. And remember that this piece should also have that interfacing piece fused to the back. Okay, we did that at the beginning, but that is, you want to make sure that you've got that. Okay. We are now going to pin our, let me figure out which one, this side, to this curve right here. So we can start down here. We've got a little notch here in that front facing that should match the notch here at the bottom of this. And then the name of the game is the notches. And then while I have clipped into this, the first clip and the last clip are the actual notches that should match up with the lining piece. I'm going to pop one more pin in here. And we're doing these right sides together. I'm going to come back and pin this little section. So I'm just going to come to the end here. And it's funny how long that seam line looks on the facing piece compared to, it doesn't look nearly as long on the lining piece just because of the way the curves are. Okay. Okay, and that second notch on that front facing matches up with the seam line. So I'm going to pin this. And we will be sewing this with the lining down. Okay, and then we've got all this mess here that we need to fit this into. But because we've clipped into this sewing line, or clipped into the cut line, this should fit fairly well, fairly easily, I guess. I mean, it will fit well, but sometimes it's not as easy. All right, like so. So it looks crazy. All right, so we're going to go back to the machine and sew with that, the lining side down and the facing up. So let's go over to the machine and do that. All right, so let's get this intense curve sewn here. So I'm going to be sewing, like I said, with the lining down and the facing up. So we are just sewing this at this 1/2 inch seam allowance. So we're just going to go slow, and we want to make sure that that raw edge does get lined up. So you may have to like stick your finger under there and kind of pull it around. Go slow though, just a little bit at a time so you're not catching any tucks. Although again, it's not the end of the world if you catch some tucks. It's easy to go back and fix. And actually when we get to the severe part of the curve is where it gets a little bit easier, because we have clipped into that sewing line, or into the cut line. Just keeping that at that 1/2 inch, and we should be inside that cut line where we clipped into that seam allowance, because we were just shy of a 1/2 inch. All right, so there we go. That all looks really good. Yep, so now we are ready to go give this a good press. So I'll meet you at the ironing board. Okay, and then once we've got this all sewn, we are going to press the seams towards the lining, which again is pretty easy. It just kind of wants to do that. So we will press from the wrong side. All right. Okay, and you'll do the same thing for the other front. And then we're gonna set these aside, oh my gosh, and work on our back lining. So let's set these aside and I'll meet you right back here to work on the back lining. Okay, for our back lining, we're basically using the remaining pieces, although I don't have the, 17 over here yet. We'll get to that in a minute. But for these next few steps, we're gonna need piece 14, which is our center back lining, piece 15, which is our side back lining, and piece 16, which is our back hem facing. We can set 15 and 16 aside for a minute though. So let's take piece 14, our center back lining, and we are going to put it together, right sides together. It is right side up at the moment, but we're going to be sewing down this seam, pivoting at this corner, pivoting at this corner, and sewing all the way down, okay? So let me just put these right sides together as opposed to wrong sides. There we go. So I'm just going to pop some pins in here. Okay. All right, so as a reminder, I'm going to go to the machine. I'm going to sew down to this point, pivot, sew to this point, pivot, and sew all the way down at my 1/2 inch seam allowance, and I'll meet you right back here. All right, so we've got that seam right there sewn right through here. So it lays weird when you have it opened up, but that's okay. So now we should have here at the top notches. We're going to take the notch on the left side, put it over to meet up to the right. And so basically that seam allowance is just going to lie flat. And we're creating a pleat. We're going to press this, but we're going to wait and press it once we've got this pleat in place. Because when you have that like so and then pull it taut, everything lays nice and flat. But we want that nice deep pleat there, there at the top. Okay, so I'm just going to go to the machine and I'm just going to baste this pleat in place right along the top at like, I don't know, 1/4 inch seam allowance. So let me do that and then we'll press this. All right, once that's basted in place, we can kind of give it a good press from the front here. So we've created like a good deep pleat there in the back of that for movement. And then if we turn it over, just want to make sure that that seam is all pressed that away. Okay, so now we are ready to sew in our piece 15, which are our side back pieces. And this curvy side is what is getting sewn into this. So we're just going to line these up right sides together. Like so. And I'm going to sew this with this side back against the feed dogs. So go ahead and sew that seam at 1/2 inch on both sides, and then I will meet you back here. Okay, once we have our side back pieces sewn, like here, we are going to open this up and press those towards the center back piece. Okay. And now we're going to need our piece 16, which is our back hem facing. And we've got it cut on the fold with both interfaced. If you look at this, you'll notice we've got a shorter curve and a longer curve, and there are notches cut on the longer curve. We're going to be sewing the shorter curve to the bottom of this, like so, okay? And you've got, again, your opposing curves. This one isn't quite as bad. And we're just going to pin one end here. And actually, did I mark center? A lot of times I did center when I cut things out on the fold, and I'm going to match that with the seam here. like so. Okay. You can pop more pins in there if you'd like. I kind of like to give it a little bit of wiggle room just so I can carefully line up those raw edges as I go. But now I'm just going to sew right across the bottom at that 1/2 inch seam allowance, and I'll meet you right back here. All right, so our facing has been sewn on. We're going to flip that facing down, press that seam allowance up towards the lining. We can press from the wrong side too. So now our final pattern piece that needs to be attached to things is, which I love when I get to that part of the project, is piece 17. And then all of our pieces are at least attached to other pieces. Then it's just a matter of attaching the different parts together. So piece 17 is our back facing. So we're going to need this one next. And this is the one that we have interfaced our neckline back here, if you recall. So now again, this is like extreme convex curves to extreme concave curves. So I'm turning this upside down, right sides together on our lining, and I am matching up center back with that. And I cut a little notch because this was cut on the fold. And then we're just going to go, we'll sew this together because this is a very twisty, turny piece. And there's a notch here on the facing that matches up to that seam line where the side back connects to center back. Okay, so it's this area here, which is extreme convex to concave curvature here. And you know, I don't know, maybe I'll pop one pin in between there just to kind of keep it wrangled a little bit. But I'm really going to be using my hands to make sure that those raw edges stay together during that. All right. Okay, so this weird conglomerate. Let's go over to the sewing machine and we will sew this back facing into the lower part of the lining. All right, so I'm going to sew with my facing up and the lining against those feed dogs. And we're just going a little by a little. So, I mean, like none of this is matching up right now. That's okay. We just want to go little by little. I'm just really concerned with what's right up here. And then start to move that lining back under. Also making sure that there aren't any like glaring pinches. Or a lot of times anything with lining, because it's so lightweight, it's really easy to have like something accidentally get folded up underneath something else. And then you sew like the hem of the lining accidentally up into the seam. I've had that happen more times than I would care to admit. Okay, then the moment of truth is, did we catch anything weird? Oh, folks, I think we're good. Yay. Okay, we got that seam. So let's go back over to the pressing station and press that seam down towards the lining. And then we're almost done with our lining pieces. We have one more step and then our lining is constructed. All right, so here she is. We're going to give her a good press. Again, making sure that's all pressed down. Now we've got our back up. Our last step in kind of the lining construction before we start putting our lining and shell together is just to attach our lining back and our lining front together at the shoulders. So, got a whole mess of pieces here. We're going to take our lining front and right sides together. We're going to sew lining back to lining front at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So go ahead and do that, and I'll meet you back here and we can press those seams open. All right, so those shoulder seams are sewn. I'm gonna stick these over a ham just for easy pressing. We're gonna press those open. Alrighty, okay, now our lining is constructed. So I'm gonna go switch back over to black thread so that you can see what I'm doing a little bit better again. And next we're gonna be attaching our lining to our outer shell. We're getting close. All right, it is now time, excuse me, to attach our linings to our outer shell. So this is all very exciting. Keeping in mind, as we're looking at the wrong side of my shell, I have a faux welt pocket and a regular welt pocket, so don't let that get confusing. I am gonna put my shell here, right side up. It's gonna be a little unwieldy when we don't have the side seams done up yet. Because the first thing we're gonna be doing is attaching our lining to the front, starting here at this bottom point, which you still can't see. This bottom point here, we're going to be sewing up and then up center front and around the neck. Okay, we'll go over that again here in just a second. All right, so I'm going to lay my lining now right side together on top of my main body of my jacket. Okay, so now we are going to pin this. And again, we're not just going down center front, we're also we're gonna come off this point here. We are gonna leave the hem portion here open for now. That gets sealed up at the very end. So we're just gonna go around and pin this and making sure that our seam allowances are going the direction that we want them to go. And if we come across any notches, we want to make sure that those are all matching up. We want to match our shoulder seams, and those should be pressed open. All right, so as a reminder, we are sewing this area, this little angled area here, all the way up center front. We'll pivot here at the top of center front. So all the way up around the shoulder seam, around the back neck, back down to this point. Basically, it's the button area. And then back down center front till we get to this little part. And then we're gonna sew this little angled part and sew off, okay? So I'm gonna go do that at the machine, and then I'll come back and we will together clip into the seam allowances and stuff, and we will understitch together. So let me go do that real quick. Oh, when you're sewing this, sew with your facing up. We want that interfaced pieces up and the uninterfaced, so the body of the jacket down, okay?
Let me go do that and I'll be right back. All right, so once we've sewn all the way around the front edge of the jacket, we now need to clip into our seam allowances, clip our corners and that sort of stuff. If you have done a version with the functioning pocket, just be careful that you don't catch, you kind of need to push that out of the way a little bit. I mean, it comes close to, not really close. It just can get folded up easily, so just be careful. Okay, so let's start here at the bottom where we started, and we're going to do some trimming. So I'm just going to cut close to my points here where I pivoted. Through there. It's pretty straight here through the upper chest, but I do want to clip into my curve here at the back neck. So starting at the shoulder seam, I'm going to clip to, but not through, that seam about every 1/2 inch so that we can get that to lay really nice and flat after we understitch. We're not doing any pressing yet because we are going to understitch that seam. I'll explain that in just a second. Okay, and then back down the other side, we want to trim close to that point and also that point. Okay, pretty easy. All right, so now we are going to go and we are going to do what is called understitching. So what understitching is magic. But what understitching is that we're going to do it in 3 passes. We are going to understitch this center front here, stop. Then we're going to understitch from this point all the way around the neck curve to this point, and then from this point down to this point. Well, we could probably also understitch this little area too. So I guess 5 passes. Anyway, the reason we want to do that, and basically what it means is that we are going to be flipping things right side out, and we're going to be sewing the seam allowance to the facing. So we're going to make sure that facing is going towards the seam allowance is going towards the facing, and we're going to stitch as close as we can. Because again, with these points, we can't get like super close up in there. But we are basically stitching on the facing about, I don't know, 1/16 inch away from that seam line with that, stitching that seam allowance to the facing. And it helps everything roll like magic to the wrong side. So I highly recommend understitching, and we'll do it as much as we can on the armholes as well, but it really does make a difference. So basically we're just kind of separating the lining from the front of the jacket here, and we're going to go back to the machine and together, and we're just going to go ahead and understitch this entire seam. So let's, all the way around in a few different passes. So let's go do that. Okay, so we're going to start understitching. I'm not going to do this little area down here at the hem. The instructions are not showing that, so, and that hem gets sewn later. So basically, we're starting at kind of this not really center front, but starting at that front seam line. We're going to do this in 3 passes. So there's that point. You know, this is the angled edge, and there's that point. So we're just trying to get in there as close as we can. But we don't want to sew a pinch, so it's just as close as you can, but it doesn't have to be perfect. And I'm wanting to make sure that that seam allowance is in fact going to the right because this is my facing side. So we're just going to get in there as close as we can. All right, and I've not pressed anything yet. So what I'm going to do is sew really close to that seam line, again, like an 1/8 to 1/16, making sure that that whole seam allowance is going towards the facing, which is on this side on my right, and I'm just kind of lightly pulling that seam apart. Okay, and then we'll be coming up to another point, so we're just going to get as close as we can into that point and then stop and backstitch. And then we'll pick back up after the point. So like right here. Now we're going up the straight edge, again, making sure that seam allowance is going the direction we want it to go. When we get to the neck edge where we've clipped into that seam allowances, that can get a little unwieldy. It's real easy to have that seam allowance going the opposite way. So just go slow. Keep checking, making sure it's going the right way. And again, sewing down as close as we can to that next point. Keeping in mind, if you do have a pocket bag, just make sure it's not getting caught up underneath your needle. Make sure it's out of the way. And stop there. All right, so now we have the front edge all sewn and understitched. We are not going to press anything quite yet. Let's go back to the pressing table, and we're going to do our armholes first. All right, so you can see we've got everything nice and edge stitched on the facing / lining side, looking good. But let's go ahead and flip that back with the lining and the shell right sides together. And we are going to we're going to do our armholes. So we're leaving, side seams are still open. So we are just going to pin here at one underarm. There's a notch there. Make sure that those match. It's also a good idea, again, to pin down, that's a very large pin, to pin down any seam allowances, like this seam allowance here for the princess seam, just to make sure it's going the direction you want. Then pin that shoulder seam with those seam allowances open. Okay, so I am now going to sew from one underarm all the way over to the other underarm. I'm going to do that on both sides, and then I'm going to come back and we're going to clip into it, and then I'll take you back over there to do the understitching. We're not going to be able to understitch all the way around. We're just going to get as close as we can to that shoulder seam. So let me sew both of these armholes, and then I'll meet you back here. All right, once I've sewn each of my armholes on each side here, we are now going to clip into these similar to what we did around the neck edge. So again, I'm going to clip two, but not through that stitching line, and I'm going about every 1/2 inch. Now this is optional in the pattern on whether or not you want to try and understitch, even though I highly doubt we're going to be able to get very close to the shoulder seam, which is kind of your goal, to try and get it all the way around. Any little bit you can do, it really does help make everything roll really nicely to the wrong side, and it just looks really clean from the front. So I would highly recommend, unless you just have the world's worst fabric that's fraying when you look at it and you're worried about pulling and tugging too much. Other than that, I would at least try the understitching. Okay, so now we have that all clipped. I'll do the other one as well. And I'm going to meet you over at the sewing machine, and we are going to basically, again, because we've already sewn up the front, so we're working with a smaller space, but we are going to open it up, again, make sure that it's going towards the facing, sew as much as we can on one side, and then we'll come at it from the other side and try and sew as much as we can up to that shoulder point. Okay, so let's go to the sewing machine and get that done. All right, so we've got these all sewn, or seam sewn, clipped. So now we are going to separate this. This is going to feel like it's a lot of back and forth, but we're basically sewing like into a tube. Now, just you want to make sure that you know which side is your facing side, because that's the side you want to make sure that you're sewing your what am I doing? Sewing your seam allowance to. So my facing is here on my right, so I want to make sure my seam allowance is going to the right. We are going right next to that seam line. And again, we're just gonna go slow because you're really sewing into a tube here. And just keep going under there, checking to make sure that seam allowance is in fact going the correct direction, whether it needs to go to the right or the left. And you do really want to be careful that you're not sewing something you don't mean to sew. Sorry, I know I'm blocking the camera. I'm just making sure my seam allowance is going the correct direction. I know this can feel a little fussy. However, it really does make a difference. So even if you can only do a little bit before it just gets really too tight in there. I know it's also getting a little hard to see because I'm really sewing in the Also, you may notice that you can get to the shoulder seam going one direction, but not the other. That's okay. Again, the goal is just as far as you can go. And I'm about to the end here. I think I'm gonna call it here. Oh, I'm gonna make it to the shoulder seam. All right, back stitch. Whew. Then you gotta pull it all back out. All right, so we've understitched one side. So now we are going to do the other side of that armhole, which is, this is always fun too, trying to figure out, okay, where's the other side? There it is. Okay, so now we're coming at this from the other way. So our seam allowance is going to be going the opposite direction. So now we are sewing it to my left because we're coming at it from the other direction. Same armhole. And the seam allowance is all sewn to the facing. Okay, so we've got a kind of a hole situation. So just turn it right back to where things are right sides together. I'm gonna do the other arm, and then we are going to pull the right side through the hole so that we've got everything in correct orientation. So let me do the other armhole, and then I'll meet you back at the ironing board. All right, so we've got basically our vest sewn at the front, around the neckline, and around the armholes, and we have everything understitched. So now we're gonna turn this right side out and give it a good press. So I'm going to start, I'm actually gonna take these fronts and just kind of flop them over, and we're gonna go from the back, and I'm just going to go in between my two layers here, and I'm going to take my hand through the arm, through that shoulder seam, grab my front, and then pull it out. We're gonna do this one side at a time. And depending on how thick your fabric is will depend how difficult it is to pull that through. Okay, now we're gonna go through the other arm, shoulder area, grab the front, pull it through the other side. All right. Okay, so now we can give this all a good press. And I'm going to press with the lining out, just because I want to make sure, well, number one, we've got some stray threads, but also I want to make sure that that lining is rolling to the lining side. Okay. All right, so we're just going to start. We'll do our front first here. And if you want to get in there like these points, they're not super sharp points, but if you want to get in there with your chopstick or double pointed needle, whatever you're using, you totally can. But I'm just going to give this a good, what we've sewn so far, a good press. We still have a lot of flipping things around and turning things this way and that, so it will get wrinkly again. When I get to the neck edge here, I think it's nice to have a ham under there. It just really helps keep things nice and flat. And then definitely when we get to the neck edge. But as you can see, that understitching makes that seam want to favor to the inside, which is what we want. Okay, so we're coming along nicely with our lining. All right, I will, the next we're going to do is our side seams, I believe. So let me readjust things, maybe give a good press from the right side as well, and then we'll do our next step. All right, so our next step is going to be sewing these side seams, and we are going to be leaving a gap in the lining of one side. So we do need to make sure that that happens. So what we're going to do first, here's my little vest, all right side out. We're going to turn it inside out, I guess, but not completely. I mean, just right sides together with the shell. Okay. So here we have, I've got my little vest here, right sides together. I'm going to pull this lining out of the way on both sides. They won't pull completely out of the way because they are sewn right here. But I'm going to be lining, pinning my shell together, right sides together, matching my notches. And then when we get, now we're going to continue pinning up through the underarm, and now we're going to be taking our lining and kind of pulling it so it's right sides together. So we're going to be matching that underarm seam. You want to make sure, and it should, if you understitched, your seam allowance should be going towards the lining. If you did not understitch, you want to make sure that it is going towards the lining. And then continue pinning the lining until you've got those side seams. And it's going to be a little weird just because it is sewn together right there by the hem. Not the hem, but by the hem. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to start sewing our side seam from the bottom all the way up and then through the side seam. On one side, it does not matter, you need to leave a gap, which means you'll start at the bottom and you're going to sew all the way up and then stop about here, backstitch, make sure you backstitch, and then we're going to start here again and then sew all the way to the end, leaving about, I don't know, a 5-ish inch gap there in that seam allowance. So let's do that one together. The other side, you're just going to continue sewing. You're not going to leave that gap. But let's go ahead and do the gap side together. All right, so we're starting here at the hem of the outside the shell, back stitching, and we're going to sew up this side seam. And again, it gets a little weird just because it is anchored there at the front. All right, so I'm gonna sew just a little bit onto the actual lining part here. And then we're gonna backstitch. You wanna make sure that that is nice and secure there. And then we're gonna pop down here about there. And we wanna make sure that we backstitch again. Make sure that those seam allowances are going the way we want them to go. And then sew to the bottom. Now, we're going to do the same thing to the other side seam, but we don't need to leave the gap on the other one. We just need one gap that we will hand sew close that is going to allow us to turn this right side out when it's time. So, okay, so do the same thing to the other side without leaving a gap, and I'll meet you at the ironing board to press these seam allowances. All right, once we have sewn those underarm seams, I've got a seam roll here, which is kind of like a ham, but a little easier to get in. And we're gonna press these seams towards the back, which is this way. So just get in there as good as well as you can. Should be able to press that one pretty well. This is the side that I sewed all the way, so I did not leave a gap in this side. And then we've got to do some gymnastics again to finish up the hem. And then we will pull everything through this little hole that we're coming up on. Try and keep those raw edges together when you hit this seam here. Just so that there's a nice bend in the seam allowance. It'll make hand sewing that together a little easier. All right. Okay. So now we have got basically our little vest looking pretty done so far, but you'll see we've got the hems are still open down here. So now we need to get these hems sewn. Otherwise, I mean, it looks just like, oh, we're ready for buttons. So what I'm gonna do is we're gonna go inside the jacket here, turning it wrong side out again, flipping this over, and now we're gonna match up this hem. So I am gonna pop pins where the side seams match. Oh my gosh, I keep grabbing the gigantic pen. And making sure that if there's any seam allowances, like here at the, what is that? The side, or the, is that the princess seam, I guess? Matching up any seams. Quit grabbing the big pen. And that those seam allowances are going the direction we want them to go. Now, here we are. So now that we have our hem all pinned together, right sides together, I'm just gonna start at, this was that angle that we sewed off at the front. I'm just gonna start here, and I'm gonna sew all the way across the bottom to the other side. And I'm gonna sew with the interfaced part up. So this side up, this side against the feed dogs. Watch out for the pocket bag if you got a pocket bag. But I'm going to go ahead and just sew that line real quick, and I'll come back and we'll turn things right side out. All right, my hem has been sewn. All right, we can clip these little corners that are here at the ends. Just remove a little bit of that bulk. And now it's time to turn things right side out. You're not going to be able to like easily press this seam open, which is unfortunate. You just can't get anything in there. But we'll give it a good press here as soon as we turn it right side out. I just have to find which side I left the hole. There it is. All right, so here's the hole that we left in our lining. I am just going to very slowly, so as not to rip the hole, pull my vest through. Inevitably, things will be going fine and then it'll get really bulky. Just trust the process. All right, now let's give it a good press before we close up that hole. Okay, looking good. All right, so let me go grab a needle and thread and I will walk you through how we're going to close up this hole in the lining. So let me go grab that and I will be right back. All right, I'm going to use red thread, so hopefully you can somewhat see what I'm doing. But I am just threading this needle, this hand sewing needle, and I'm going to double it up on itself. We don't need a ton. This isn't like a huge opening. All right. So because that we, I'm going to give this a press real quick. Because we pressed that seam allowance towards the back, we have one of the piece of fabric that's laying just flat, one side that's laying flat, and then the other one has a fold in it that we have pressed. So we're just kind of folding or sewing that down. So I'm just going to go under here on that flat piece of fabric, and I'm basically burying my knot. I'm going to tuck it in there. I'm going to try and zoom in so that you can really see what I'm doing. Let's see. But also keeping you in frame. All right, so I've buried my tail right here. So now I'm just going to pick up here and sew right through that fold and then pick up a little piece of the bottom. Pull it through. This is a ladder stitch. Pick up the fold. Little piece of the bottom. Maybe. You don't want to go through the to the right side. The goal is to just be sewing through the lining. Okay, so we're just going to continue all the way up and then we'll tie it off. Okay, once you've gotten to the end of your line here, we're just going to take a little bite here out of the under. Obviously, you're going to use matching thread to where we have a loop. And I'm just going to go backwards through the loop once, backwards through the loop twice, pull it taut, and then bury that knot, and then trim off my tail. And there we go. We've got a sewn up side seam. Okay, the only thing we've got left are buttonholes and buttons and then our little back belt piece. So I will meet you back here and we're going to talk about buttons. Okay, so I have gone on the right side of my vest when worn. marked my buttonholes, 4 of them. And you can do this by just putting your pattern piece back on top, remembering that this will extend 1/2 inch over because there was a seam allowance there to begin with. And go ahead and mark your button placement. Now, these are going to be sewn horizontally, not vertically. So what I'm now going to do is I'm just going to, so that I am making my buttonholes as perpendicular to the front as possible with a friction pen, because this will disappear. And I'm just going to go a little bit. I'm just going to make a little bit of a line, just a little. These buttons are only 5/8 of an inch buttons, so I don't want to go past like what the actual buttonhole is, but this will give me a little bit of a guide when I'm making my buttonholes. Okay, like so. All right, so now you're just going to go to your machine and you're going to sew your 4 buttonholes. However, your machine, all machines are a little different. So go ahead and do that, and then I will meet you back here and we'll talk about putting button placements and our belt buckle and all that jazz. Okay, once you've sewn your 4 buttonholes, you're going to need to cut them open, whether you're cutting them open with an X-Acto knife or with a buttonhole chisel, which is my preference. Be very careful if you're using a seam ripper, or it's just so easy just to rip right through the front of your project. But we do have our 4 buttons. I'm going to show you how or buttonholes, how we're going to mark for our buttons now. I'm just going to do this. Okay, so I am putting our fronts together, but not how you would button them. I'm putting them together like wrong sides together, basically, like kind of sandwiched together. Not because they'll be worn overlapped, obviously. But this is a great way to mark your buttons. I'm now going to stick a pin right through the center of that buttonhole. And this is also a really great way to make sure that your, everything is matching up, that your bottoms are matching up and everything else. So I've gone 1 at the top, 1 at the bottom, and then I'll do the 2 in the middle. Then I can flip this over, oops, and mark exactly where that is on the right side, or on the left side, sorry. So now I have got my 4 button placements on this side of the vest. So now I can go in with my buttons and either machine stitch or hand stitch those into place. So I am going to do that real quick, and then when I come back, I'm going to show you how we install the vest buckle in the back, and then we're done. All right, once we have got our 4 buttons and buttonholes done, we can button up our vest, and we are so close to being finished. We just need to add our little vest buckle here to the back. But look how nicely that all sits on there. Again, high contrast, so you can see what I'm doing. All right, let's flip it over to the back here. So I had pinned these in place so they just wouldn't be flopping all over the place. So on our right side when worn is shorter than our left side. So on this little shorter side, you have got this vest buckle that has these little teeth on it that help grip things. We're going to take this little short piece, and it is going to go through, basically around this middle bit here, just around that middle bar. And enough to where we can pull that through just a little bit because we're going to go to the machine and we'll do this together, and we're going to either zigzag or do a, and I think I will do a zigzag, zigzag this in place. I'm going to do it from this side though so I can see what I'm doing, to zigzag that in place. Okay? And then I'll show you how to, then this is the adjustable part. So I'll show you how to do that. All right, let's go back to the machine and let's zigzag this in place. And again, this is what it looks like from the right side. We went around so that the little tail is on the back side of this. So let's go sew it in place. All right. So here we are looking at the back side. And I am just going to put this on. I've got this on a zigzag stitch. And I want to put this, let's see, on a 2 length. Maybe not even a, maybe we'll leave it at 1.5. 1.5 length, but a smaller width. We're going to go like a 2.5. 2.5 width, 1.5 length. I'm just gonna sew down and then sew back. You could do a bar tack as well. My bar tacks on my machine, although they're really, really good, are just really short, and I want to hit all of that. All right. Again, this is going to look messy because I'm using high contrast thread, but you'll get the idea. So there we go. We've sewn that down. Trim your threads. If this were in a matching thread, it would be amazing. All right, just like this. Okay, let's go back to the ironing board and I'll show you how to thread the other piece in. All right, so here's our little back belt. There's the wrong side where we had folded it over. This is from the right side. And now we're just gonna take our left side, so our longer side here, and we're gonna thread it up. There are these little teeth here that are gonna help keep that in place. And then back down the other side, like so. So now it's really easy. If you wanna tighten, if you wanted to cinch in that back if you needed to, that should hold, or I'm gonna guess I don't need any cinching because I'm thicker through the waist. So it's all completely up to you, but I don't know that for sure. But there we go. That is how you do your the back buckle if you want to be able to cinch in that back waist, and I will try it on and determine if I want to do that or not. All right, let's go back to the mannequin and end this sew along.
And there we have it, our finished Hartwell vest. Folks, this is a fantastic way as an entry point into tailoring. If this has been your first Welt Pocket, congratulations. Whether you chose the functioning one or the non-functioning one, either way, well done. You are well on your way to a tailoring career. As a reminder, you can grab this pattern through Cashmerette's Club. If you are grabbing it in April 2025, you can have access to this pattern at the lowest tier. But if you're watching this later and you would like access to this pattern, you will have to get the all access membership, which is absolutely worth the money. I pay for it with my own money. I will continue paying for it with my own money. Because I really find a lot of value in it. Not only, I just really love the way Cashmerette patterns fit me, and I've been very impressed with the patterns they put out each month. All right, as always, if you have absolutely any questions along the way, please leave them in the comment section down below. I'm happy to answer any of those. For links to the club, I've got those all down in the description box as well if you would like to go grab this pattern. Otherwise, if you would like to hear more about making of this vest, and I may have made a second one, my thoughts, all that, basically a review of the pattern, stay tuned to the channel. I will have a full review as well as have this modeled on my actual body in that full review here very, very soon. So stay tuned for that. I can't wait to read your questions. Happy to answer them, and happy sewing. I'll see you guys in the next one.